He died, and Lamech lived 182 years and begot a son, and he called his name Noah, which means rest, saying, "This one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." And after he begot Noah, Lamech lived 595 years and begot sons and daughters. And so all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, and when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown." So, here is a description in chapter 6 of a society that is just about to incur the judgment of God, the wrath of God. It's a very fascinating study in light of that. The first thing that he describes here is a characteristic of the days of Noah, and Jesus did say that prior to his return, that it would be as is the days of Noah. The first thing you see is that there's a tremendous population explosion going on here, and daughters are born to the men, multiplication all over the face of the earth. And then the sons of God, verse 2, saw the daughters of men, and they involved themselves sexually with these women, these sons of God, with these daughters of men, and the production of this particular sexual relationship is men of renown, giants. And so who are these guys? Who are these sons of God? Well, in the Bible, the word sons of God is a term that is used 3 times in the Bible. In each place, it is used in reference to angels. Always a reference to angels. And so most people look at it and say somehow there is an angelic involvement with women here that produces this men of renown, these giants. The problem is that how in the world do angels involve themselves with women sexually? How does that happen? The explanation most often given is that they simply possessed men, and it was demon-possessed men who were possessed by fallen angels, who then involved themselves physically with these women. It produced these giants. The problem with that is we don't know how in the world being possessed by a demon would affect a gene pool to then affect the type of child that would come forth out of that relationship. Others look at this and they say, well, it really doesn't have anything to do with demons. What it's talking about here is that you've got the seed of Seth, which is the godly seed, becoming joined in marriage with the daughters of Cain, and that's what is being produced here. That allows people, it's a little more easy to deal with that because you're dealing with men and women that are just regular men and women. The problem with that, of course, is how does that produce giants? And how does that produce some particular stature of men or men of renown? And what I happen to think is this. I don't know. If I was going to lean towards something, I would lean towards the fact that it does seem to be some kind of demons involving themselves in sexual activity with women, and somehow these giants, and the word giants there in verse 4 it literally means fallers. It produced some kind of fallers, but it's translated giants, speaking of the giants in the land when Caleb and Joshua came back, so it can mean giants too. So somehow I think that was involved, but what I'll do is drop back 10 yards and punt on the thing, and I would say at the very least what you have here is a time of very strong demonic influence, and involvement in the sexuality of mankind. And certainly we see that today. And so they took wives. So the second characteristic of Noah's day was tremendous sexual immorality. Tremendous amount of sexual immorality. And the Lord said in verse 3 concerning all of this as He watches it, He says, "My Spirit is not going to strive with man forever." It indicates that He was striving with man. He was striving with them. He wasn't just striving with Noah. He was striving with all of mankind on the face of the planet to make them understand that what they were involved in was wickedness. And He looked at them and they were not listening to Him. They were not heeding His voice at all. And so He says, "I'm not going to strive with man forever." And He strove through His Word. He strove through godly men. And He strove through their consciences. But they refused to listen, even as people refuse to listen to Him today. For He is indeed flesh, yet His days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days. Fallers could be a reference to those angels that fell from their first estate. It could be a reference to apostates, or it could be a reference to those who fall upon others to perform violence upon them. And so there were giants or fallers on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. It's an interesting thing. He noticed the wickedness of man throughout the entire earth. Is there a spot on the face of this planet that is not covered with wickedness? You know? Singapore, I guess, because they just kill everybody who, doesn't toe the line. But I mean, every single bit of this planet, if you were to look at it, you wouldn't look at it and go, "Boy, we got a couple of hot spots of wickedness here, but by and large, it looks pretty good by Yemeni." You look at the face of this planet and you go, is there some square mile anywhere that righteousness reigns, where there isn't wickedness? The whole planet is covered with oppression. It's covered with violence. It's covered with wickedness. It's just as in the days of Noah. It's exactly what it's like. And he looks at it and he saw that wickedness, the wickedness of man, was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. I mean, you can't make it any clearer. Every, only, continually, talking about a total depravity of mankind. So we look at the world that we're in. And Jesus gave an additional characteristic of the marks of the last days. He said men would be marrying and giving in marriage, and they'd be feasting. In other words, men would, in the midst of all of this wickedness, in the midst of all of this perversion, they would just go on about their business as if judgment would never come. It was just, this is the normal thing. It's unrighteous, it's wrong, it's unholy, it's wickedness, but nobody's ever going to call us to account. Now, we have an absolute cow. When you've got somebody out, roaming in the neighborhood or roaming in a city that is, performing acts of violence and injustice and unrighteousness against mankind, and we just, why doesn't, somebody do something about this? Law enforcement, do something about this. And we want justice. And yet, isn't it funny how mankind can take and look at mankind as a whole and look at all of the wickedness and say, oh, there really is no standard. There'll never be any judgment coming down. There isn't a just God. We'll never be held accountable for our activity and our actions and our thoughts and our life. And God said that will be the attitude, as if there is no one greater than them, expecting more of them in terms of a standard. And so that's the world that we live in. And you look at the sexual immorality all over the place. And we have to be very, very careful concerning this issue of sexual immorality today. Because it's like, how can I say this? It tells us in the book of Hebrews that marriage is honorable among all, and the marriage bed is undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Sexual activity, the expression of that portion of a relationship between a man and a woman, is to be expressed only within the marriage relationship, only within the realm of a lifelong commitment on the part of both persons to one another. That's where it's to be expressed. And we look around, and we want to be very gracious with people. But the fact of the matter is, anything other than that in terms of sexual intercourse is sin. I don't care if a person comes along and says, well, you know, I've only gone to bed with 7 women this year. I know people that went to bed with 20. I'm doing pretty good, you know. And they were all Christians, Mike. You know, yeah, all Christians. Yeah, I went to a church, by the way, where the guy, he went to bed with 6 or 8 women in the church before leadership found out about it, before we found out about it, not here. And he justified it. He said, but I witnessed to every one of them. Oh, great. Well, we're sorry we called you in on this then. And in his own mind, he had justified it. He had rationalized it by that. Somehow that sanctified it. But that is the righteous standard. That's the righteous standard. And so this sexual immorality all over the place. And it is so hard to make a stand. It takes the Spirit of God to make a stand. And those of you who are single, you think, boy, my problems will be over once I get married. Well, you will have an opportunity for expression of that relationship in your marriage relationship. But there is still great temptation related to that. All of the days of your life this side of 110 years old. And so it's important for us to understand that it's wrong. It's wrong, it's sin, and God notices it. And it's important for us to understand, too, that as God looked at the violence on the earth in the time of Noah, that he was greatly upset with it, greatly upset with the violence and the wickedness. And he's greatly upset with it today, greatly upset with it. We'll see later in places in the Old Testament where he held entire cities accountable for the death of one innocent person. He would hold an entire king and his family responsible for the unjust death of soldiers who had surrendered to him. Life is precious to God. Man is created in the image of God. And we look around, and it is one of the challenges of our life to open up the paper and, another 172 people slaughtered, and all. Yesterday was 175. We're getting better. And just to look into somehow to get hardened at the level of violence and the amount of innocent blood that is falling into the ground, and God takes note of all of it, and He will hold mankind responsible for it. The violence, a sign that we're in the last days. We're in the days of Noah. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible, terrible thing. Life is so cheap. Oh, you killed someone? And I was watching the news the other day. Again, a stupid thing to do. I was watching in L.A. County, where they were, because they don't have any ability to hold people, they were releasing not only prostitutes and different things, but they were releasing people that had been arrested for burglary. They didn't have any place to hold them. Now you read the news, and I read the news. The person takes and just kills an innocent person. Just takes and snuffs out their life. They get 6 years. 6 years. Is that what a human life is worth now? 6 years? That's what it's worth? Oh, then no wonder why society comes down and dips down to that level in terms of the value of a human life. Well, is that all I'm going to get or potentially get? It's worth the chance. And it's terrible. And it's wrong. And there'll be judgment. There'll be justice that comes forth because of the amount of violence and innocent blood that is shed. Evil imaginations continually, universal corruption, evil being called good, good being called evil, until those who are involved in sexual immorality and wickedness and violence and evil imaginations become the world's heroes, and they are today. Business as usual. Business as usual. And so that's the scene of what was going on in the days of Noah. May I say that being a preacher in 1993 versus any decade prior, I don't need to stretch these scriptures to make them appear to fit in our day. They fit our day. They absolutely fit our day. And the Lord was sorry that He had made man on the earth, and He was grieved in His heart. And so the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. And that's as He looks at the entire world. And then notice these two precious words of verse 8. But Noah. Oh, but Noah. Oh, he looks all over the entire planet, and his eyes settle on a man who is different. And how important for God to look at our lives tonight and to see the immorality and to see the violence and to see the wickedness and to see the devices, but then to be able to say, but Damion, or but whatever our name might be. What a precious thing. But Noah. And Noah stands in contradistinction to all of that was going on around him, stark contrast to it, and he shows us that you can do it. You can do it. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Where was the grace in Noah? The grace was in the eyes of the Lord. The eyes of the Lord. God looks at him. And then He describes him. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man. That's what he was positionally before God. It means to be straight. To be straight. This was a man who was, again, looking ahead to the coming of Messiah. And because he was, God looked at him positionally and said, this is a just man. He is just in my sight. But not only was he just, but it says he was perfect. And the word perfect means blameless, to be whole or complete, to have integrity. He was wholly and completely given himself over to God. And he was perfect or blameless in his generations, which were wicked generations. And then number 3, Noah walked with God. He walked in the same direction as God was walking in, not the direction that the entire rest of the world was walking in. And Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. It was ruined, and to lay in ruins is what it means there. And so they had destroyed it morally, filled with violence. And so God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy the earth. And God comes in and He warns Noah. Whenever God talks to us, it's important for us to understand that there's a reason, and it's important. And oftentimes when He talks to us, there's the tendency to say, yeah, thank you, God, for telling me that and keeping me up to date as it relates to, I don't really need to hear that. That's obvious. And then right around the corner, 48 minutes, 48 hours, all of a sudden the thing, whatever it is, blasts into our life, and we realize that we needed to be reminded of what it was that God was reminding us of. And so God comes into Noah and He reminds him. Here He speaks something to him. And Noah's going to take very, very seriously what God has to say. He said, make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it with pitch, inside and outside with pitch. And so he says, make this ark. And God, knowing of the judgment that was coming, knew what was going to be required for salvation. And he said, this is what you're going to need, Noah. You're going to need an ark, and here's the dimensions of it. I know what it is that's going to come, and I'm the only one that knows what salvation is going to be sufficient. And he's done the same thing in Jesus Christ. As he looks at our lives, he says there's a judgment coming. There's a perfect judgment coming. There's a white throne judgment coming. And the only protection, the only salvation that is sufficient for the judgment that I know is coming is found in the person of Jesus Christ. He knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's talking about. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, and its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. And so here is a boat, an ark that is made that its total volumetric capacity is over 1,400,000 cubic feet. In other words, you could take 522 railroad livestock cars and put them on the ark. It's a big boat. It's a big job. He had about 120 years to do it. It's a big job. And you shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark on its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks, so it's 3 stories. And behold, I myself am bringing a flood of waters on the earth to destroy from under the heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life, and everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you, and of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. And of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind, 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. God brought them forward to the ark. Otherwise, that would have been a whale of a roundup to try and get them. They did lose the unicorn, though, you know. Some of you remember the song. I'm not going to sing it. Don't groan. Don't groan on me, Lance. I wasn't going to sing it. But there were some green alligators and long-necked geese. But we won't sing it, Lance. I'm not going to sing it. Some humpy-back camels and some chimpanzees. Anybody want to finish that for? I'm just kidding. And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. And thus Noah did according to, and note this word, it's the key to this section, according to all that God suggested. Now there's a second word that's important, commanded him, so he did. Every command of God has a design behind it. There's a reason for it. There's a reason for it. And here is Noah. He takes everything that God called him to do. Every single thing he takes and he does. And it's important that he does do it. It tells us in Hebrews 11, verse 7, that being warned of God, he moved with godly fear. He had the fear of God. And he needed the fear of God to build this ark, because you can imagine what kind of a razzing he would have taken in building this ark. It had never rained on planet Earth. The earth is still being watered by a mist. They've never had any rain. And here he takes and he begins to build an ark. Doesn't begin to build a rowboat or a yacht. He's building a huge ark. You can fit 522 livestock railroad cars in it. This is a big boat. And he begins to build this thing. And you can imagine what the neighbors were thinking as he begins to build this. Hey, Noah, what are you doing out here? I'm building a boat. What's a boat? Right? You're ahead of me. Well, it's something that floats on water in case it floods. What's a flood? Well, it's something that happens when it rains 40 days and 40 nights. What's rain? They didn't know what any of this meant. This is a man of faith. Absolutely a man of faith. And so they began to print their Noah joke books. How many Noahs does it take to replace a light bulb? This kind of thing. And you can imagine the kind of torment that came against him in him doing this for 120 years as he preaches building this boat. And it was the fear of God that kept him obeying. Very important. Very, very important. And so he preached that entire time, and there wasn't a single convert the entire time as he saw it and as he hammered and as he built that ark. They just shook their heads and they laughed at him, all of the common sense people, even as all of the common sense people laugh and shake their heads at you.